Recorded. So I'm letting everyone in right now from the waiting room. Yes. So as I said, my name is Kevin Mahler. I am the president of the board of directors, and I'm joined today by my co-presenters, Ben Johnson, the vice president of GPA Nebraska chapter, and treasurer Noel Haft. And we all happen to live and work in the Omaha area, but
negative 0.3%. This is the first contraction.
and I bet that audio is. I'm gonna just mute you all. And I believe you have the ability to unmute yourself. But, so welcome. And what is this? Okay, so before we get started on that question, I just want to say again, now that we're all in the room, that this is being recorded. And so I tried to make this in webinar mode. I actually am not. I need to share my screen. So it's not in presentation mode, I know. But I just wanted to say that if you're not comfortable being on camera, you don't need to be. And if you're not comfortable having your voice recorded, that's all right. When we communicate at the end of the presentation, you can just chat. If you have a question, if you have a comment, you can chat, and that won't necessarily be recorded. And this will be available. The recording of this will be available on the GPA Nebraska .blog website in about 7 to 10 days, hopefully 7 to 10 hours, but we'll see how it goes. And you're welcome to ask questions through chat. So I'm going to switch this over to presentation mode to let you all know, what is this? What are we all talking about today? So obviously we're living through unprecedented times. So in the last few months, a lot of presentations, webinars, resources have been written and hosted, and helpful discussions have happened, and it's hard to keep your finger on the pulse. So what we wanted to do for you that's hopefully helpful during this time is watch a few webinars and report back to you on what they were like. So that is the point of what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk about a webinar that I watched. Ben's going to talk about webinars that he watched, and Noel is going to talk about some webinars too. We're going to get through this all pretty quickly. We're only going to be here for 56 more minutes. And we're going to hopefully hear from you about what resources you like. So rather than everybody, watching webinars all over the place, it's good to have some dialogue about what is good, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, what has become outdated. And this all traces back to an email that you all probably received, if you're GPA members, around Thursday, March 27th. And it says GPA recorded webinars on recent changes in federal funding. That was less than a month ago. And if you don't have that, there's going to be links at the end, and I'm happy to share the slides with you. And here are the 4 presentations we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Tanya Brown Kinzel's Assessing Your Federal Grant Vulnerabilities After Recent Administrative Changes. We're going to talk about Rachel Werner, GPC, and her presentation, Status of Federal Funding and Potential Impacts. We're going to talk about Karen Norris's Navigating Executive Orders and the appropriations process. And we're going to talk about Scott Scheffler's recent executive actions impacting grantees. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ben, and Ben can talk about Tanya Brown Kinzel's presentation. Honestly, I watched it as well, but in the interest of time, I just want to hand the proverbial microphone over to Ben so he can tell us about it. But even though this recording of Tanya's or Tonia's happened over a month ago, it's still very helpful and very relevant because she catalogs what has been decided, what has been announced, and gives some helpful ways of how to interpret it as a grant writer. So, Ben Johnson works at Women's Center for Advancement in Omaha, and he is the vice president of GPA Nebraska chapter. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and jump in any time to add more detail. Like I said, we watched these webinars, and this one's fantastic. If you're a GPA member, it's free. Of all of the ones I've seen, this was probably the most helpful. But as we're kind of trying to figure out what's going on with the federal funding landscape, and we're looking at all of these resources, most of them start with kind of a timeline and tell you a little bit about how we got to where we are. Now, this is meant to be kind of exhaustive. It's not, or an illustrative list, not an exhaustive list. But I wanted to just run through it real quick because I think it's kind of helpful. So January 20th, Inauguration Day, we have a flurry of executive orders, and those fall broadly into four categories, which we'll talk about. And then the following week, there's an order issued by the Office of Management and Budget that says freeze all grants. And I don't know about you, but I remember where I was. It was like 9 at night. I was on my couch watching TV, and it was like a meteor hit the whole nonprofit sector, right? And so this leads to a whole flurry of lawsuits, and ultimately they rescind it a couple of days later. And then even though after they rescind it, they still say, okay, but we want all of the agencies to kind of do a review of your grants to make sure that they align with these new priorities. So as a result of that, we see some changes in early February. For example, I just list NEA here as an example because I used to work with an arts organization. They change their historical long-standing challenge grants and really shift the focus around sort of more patriotic types of things that are in alignment with the orders. Around the same time, we see NIH capping indirect costs, which is a big deal for people in the research world. And on February 18th, this presidential memo comes out that says it's all about transparency and wanting agencies to disclose all of their funding. And so we're seeing lots of scrutiny kind of in the public eye along that. And one thing that I've witnessed at our agency is a lot of the federal agencies at this time in February, March are pulling all of their NOFOs down from grants.gov. They're kind of scrubbing it. They're just saying, okay, we have all these open funding opportunities. We're going to voluntarily pull them down, look at them, make sure that they're in alignment with all of this new stuff that's going on. And a lot of those just haven't come back. So that's kind of the status of those. March 31st, I just like to mention that this was impacted me because I do some work with museums and libraries as a grant writer, and that whole agency of IMLS is just terminated outright, not their grants, but all of their staff. So there's lots of things happening here in conjunction. In April, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, has sort of seizes control of grants.gov. And there's while all this is going on, we're having this unprecedented reduction in force, right? So the federal agencies are being longtime employees are being asked to retire, um, forced to leave. They're being fired, and this is leading to a lot of disruption for some of us in the grants world, where people that we're reaching out to are not being responsive. Our payment systems and things like that are not fully functional. And then finally, I just put, I think from last week, there's the Schedule F sort of order is around making government employees kind of all political appointees, which would make them easier to fire, which I think will impact all of these agencies even more in terms of this reduction of force. And again, that's not an exhaustive list. I just think it's helpful to kind of do a quick reminder of where we're at. Um, could you go to the next slide real fast? The executive orders that we mentioned fall broadly into these categories, and so I think it's helpful to be aware of what they are. I think we all know what they are broadly because the administration is not shy about sharing these. Um, but when we're looking at the grants and just to do like risk assessment. So Tanya has in her presentation a great risk assessment tool, which basically breaks down the executive orders and the stated priorities line by line, word by word, and then compares it against different funding agencies and asks questions about, do you do this type of work, yes or no? And that's a great assessment tool, which we'll link to at the end. But just broadly speaking, the first sort of bucket of priorities, Make America Safe Again, is all around immigration and border security. The second one is all about environment, energy, climate, and also tariffs and sort of economic policy gets lumped into there. The third one is really about this cutting the size of government, and that's where this kind of reduction in force fits in. And the fourth one is probably the most targeted. It's really pretty specific to trans folks and what the administration calls radical gender ideology. There's also some stuff in there about patriotism, but that's really what that is about. So broadly speaking, those are kind of the what we're talking about as the new priorities. And so if you go to the next slide, what the types of work that folks do in nonprofit sectors that are most likely to be impacted the quickest are I have kind of listed out here based on just the wording of those priorities and executive orders, also based on cuts that we've already seen happen to our own agencies, our partner agencies, and things like that. I don't think that any sector is immune from the fallout of this, but I think that these are probably the ones that definitely are priorities for cuts that we've seen so far. I did want to share this just as a slide. I think a lot of you probably saw this list that came out from National Institutes of Health. I think it was leaked to New York Times. And this is one agency's new review process. So if any of these words exist in the title of a grant application or in the abstract of a grant application, it triggers a automatic review. And they have kind of a decision tree about if these things are going against the spirit of these new executive orders and things like that. So I think it's interesting to see just how broad these terms are. Words like women are in there, words like groups. I mean, these are just words that you would use randomly in any sentence. So we have to realize that agencies have probably instituted, other agencies as well have similar sorts of processes. And so I find this list